partially evolved primates, that we will get over our fear of death or our need for worship and our willingness to believe in gods. All I can ask people to do is one by one for themselves, to emancipate themselves from this primitive belief, and for societies one by one, as many have, to put at least the theocratic phase behind them and build up a wall of separation between religion and politics. And that's what I'm here to do.
If I can offer a brief thought, there is a very strong evolutionary argument against Freud. In fact, evolution is decimating a lot of what Freud had to say, but I want to deal specifically with the idea of wish fulfillment. The thing to realize is that for surviving organisms, it is extremely expensive to hold illusory beliefs. And evolution counts against them. For example, imagine the case of two rabbits. Let's call them the survivor rabbit and the eternal life rabbit. Okay, and both are being pursued, let's say, by a wolf. The survivor rabbit says, I've got only one life to live, run like hell. The eternal life rabbit goes, yeah, probably I should try to escape, but I've got another life waiting for me that's even better than this one. In other words, the eternal life rabbit has the illusion which rabbit is more likely to get eaten. The point being here that evolution says that religion is expensive. Even in ancient times when people had less, they built pyramids and cathedrals and put the best calf and the best food away for the gods. This is non-Darwinian behavior. Those kinds of people should be expected to be wiped out from the gene pool, but they aren't. In fact, religion has a better survival value than atheism. That's why there are a lot more Christians in the country than atheists. So the point here being that the argument against Freud isn't just that illusions automatically die, but rather that illusions make no Darwinian sense when they are this costly, and Freud needs to come up with a better explanation.
It's ingenious, but it doesn't allow for the retarding effect upon human civilization of superstition, slavery, genocide, human sacrifice, religious warfare, resistance to scientific and medical advance, and so forth, all of which can be chalked up with a great deal more accuracy, I might add, to the religious worldview.
Okay.
And which now that we're about to reach the point where apocalyptic weaponry is within the grasp of messianic parties and states, they may find that it's extremely counter-survival in a very alarming and immediate sense.
Next question.
My question is for Mr. D'Souza. And I'd prefer if you didn't go into a deep philosophical explanation, but just answered the.
I'll try to give you a shallow one.
The simple example. I just would like you to answer without going too deep. But why doesn't God heal amputees?
Why doesn't God do what?
Heal amputees. Why do people survive cancer but not regrow limbs?
Why doesn't God heal amputees? I think this is a question that you might say presumes unbelievable. Christopher protested against it earlier, but it's unbelievable human arrogance. The human arrogance is this, that God is a kind of cosmic bellhop whose job it is ultimately to remedy all our sufferings. Maybe God created a universe which has many goods. Maybe God created a multiplicity of creatures which are in some senses good in themselves. Maybe human beings are part of those goods, but also subject to the same natural laws that affect the universe. So that earthquakes, tsunamis, natural disasters, as human evil, that's the product of free will. Maybe God's plan is ultimately providential. It concerns salvation, your soul, the next life. So even if God were to grow back your limb, you're still going to die. And what good is that going to do if you've got a long limb, but ultimately you die separated from God? So you may say that God has perhaps a little bit of better priorities than we do.
Genius.
Next question.
In your in your first speech, that Christianity, the hypothesis of Christianity, is void because we change our story, so to say. Isn't that one of the main corollaries of the scientific method, that you change your theories with new data and adapt it so that it fits the evidence and not the other way around?
I'm not sure I got the first part of your question. Yes, of course, that's the scientific method is to be always in doubt and to be always willing to test your own assumptions against new evidence. But that's completely different from the affirmation of faith. The affirmation of faith is a presupposition. I used to sit and listen to it being said, in order to believe, you must have faith in order to believe. There was nothing you could tell me in advance that if I could show it to you, would destroy your faith. It's evidence proof in that case. You couldn't have a bigger discrepancy between two ways of looking at the world than the religious and the scientific one.
Let me support your point a little different way, though. I think what she's trying to say, and I would agree with her completely, is that we always talk about scientific progress. We judge science by its latest and most spectacular advances. We judge religion by, you may say, its oldest and crudest interpretations. And so we don't concede religion the chance to progress like science. I mean, I could attack science by saying, let's look at those early scientists who, when people got sick, would cut them open and start bleeding them to death. Let's look at the ridiculous theories of people like Thales, who lived in the 5th or 6th century before Christ, and that would be an indictment against science. You'd say, no, let's judge science by its best guy. Let's put up Einstein. But when it comes to religion, you don't concede the same progress, and it's quite possible that a religious principle, let's say the story of the Good Samaritan, the principle of help your neighbor, which is interpreted rather narrowly. In ancient Israel, it means that the Samaritan helps somebody outside his own tribe, but then through the centuries and through Christianity, this principle is universalized. So tomorrow, if there's a famine in Rwanda, that becomes my neighbor. Very different than what the Jews would have said in the time of the Old Testament, but it's the taking of the religious principle and, in a sense, progressively developing it through time. Scientific progress, religious progress.
No, but the people, I'm sorry, I know I'm trespassing on the audience's time, but the scientific method is precisely to say, let's look at Thales and let's look at alchemy and rubbish medicine, these other things, and gradually overcome them and transcend them and find further and better innovations. It's not to say they weren't trying to be scientific. They were. Your analogy just doesn't hold. Now, you'll remember his name. I've forgotten it for the second. But the physicist who first came up with the idea of the Big Bang was a Catholic, practicing Catholic, at the University of Louvain in Belgium.
Bernard Lemaitre.
That's it. And he took his findings to the Pope of the time, Pope Leo, I think, who said, I think, Your Holiness, you should know about this. And Pope Leo took it in as well as he could. He said, it's very impressive stuff. He said, if you like, I'll make it an article of faith. I'll say that all Catholics have to believe this. Now do you see the difference between the scientific and the religious method? I think that's the best illustration that I know. Professor Lemaitre said, actually, no, Your Holiness, I don't think that would be quite the way to spread the word. But there you go.
Okay, next question.
Thank you both for being here. My question is for Mr. D'Souza. If you wanted to logically demonstrate the existence of God to an 11 or 12-year-old, how would you do that?
The question is, how would you make the case to a 12-year-old that God exists? And this is a very pertinent question, since I have in my house a 14-year-old daughter. And so we all have to make this case to our children, particularly now that we live in secular culture. You can't just assume it. I think that one of the best ways to show a child is to point to morality. Because children have a very clear, undiluted, and you may say undistorted sense of right and wrong. See, when we're adults, we develop cunning rationalizations. Because we want to do something that runs against morality, we try to invert the principle. In other words, we become extremely and ingeniously Clintonian in a way that Christopher Hitchens would fully understand. We try a moral inversion in which the right becomes wrong, the wrong becomes... Children don't do that. There's, in the child, you may say this sort of... The innocence of the child is, in a sense, the clear recognition of the difference. And so in that sense, children hear within themselves the voice. Children are actually natural theists. You don't have to